Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really fascinating historical arc. We're going to look at how multiple regional sources, ranging from historical analyses right up to modern political commentary, trace a century-old Western geopolitical strategy in the Middle East. It's a complex story of shifting empires, strategic alliances, and what analysts call a massive geopolitical baton pass. Let's trace exactly how we got here. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to chronologically trace this transition through 5 key phases: the strategic roots in Balfour, the Mandate and Resistance era, the pivotal 1948 handover, the modern U.S.-Israeli military partnership, and finally, U.S. strategy post-2001. Let's get right into it.
Starting with Section 1, Strategic Roots and the Balfour Declaration, or what we can call the British Foundation.
So, during World War I, the British wove this incredibly complex and honestly contradictory web of diplomatic agreements. The Wikipedia excerpts highlight 3 major moves. First, in 1915, they promised Arab independence to spark an uprising against the Ottomans. But then, just a year later, you have the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement basically carving up the region between Britain and France. And then, of course, came 1917.
Let's actually look at the words of that 1917 declaration. It reads, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people." Now, if we look at the source Al-Quds Al-Arabi, they argue this wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment WWI decision. No, they frame this as a deeply calculated Western strategic move designed to plant a settler entity right in the Arab world. And get this, they actually trace this geopolitical concept all the way back to a policy proposed by British Prime Minister Lord Palmerston in 1839.
Notice that specific phrase right there, national home. Historical sources point out that this was a deliberately ambiguous term. I mean, it literally had no precedent in international law. Notice it doesn't explicitly promise a state. And that strategic ambiguity was absolutely crucial. It gave the British some much-needed diplomatic breathing room, letting them lock in alliances without immediately committing to a fully independent state.
Moving on to Section 2, the British Mandate and Palestinian Resistance. Contradictory promises. Well, as you might expect, those contradictory promises, they sparked some serious unrest. The local Palestinian population mobilized against these British policies, and we see a very clear chain reaction. You've got the 1920 Jerusalem Uprising, the 1921 Jaffa Uprising, the 1928 Burak Revolt, all of it building up to a massive general strike and revolt from 1936 to 1939, which was spearheaded by figures like Hajj Amin al-Husseini. To put down that major revolt in the late 1930s, Britain brought in a massive military arsenal. We're talking airplanes, tanks, heavy artillery, the whole shebang. And this intense crackdown severely weakened the Palestinian resistance right as World War II was looming, and crucially, right before the Mandate itself fell apart.
Which brings us to Section 3, 1948, Withdrawal and Israel's Establishment. The transition.
According to the analysis in Knewsnet, 1948 wasn't just a localized conflict. It was a global handover of influence, a literal geopolitical baton pass. The British Mandate officially ended on May 15, 1948, and as Britain stepped back, a new era instantly dawned, with the United States stepping up to fill that massive strategic void.
Now, looking at the human impact of this transition, Al-Quds Al-Arabi provides a pretty stark statistic: 61%. That is the percentage of the Palestinian population displaced in 1948. And through subsequent conflicts, the source notes that by the year 2020, the total proportion of Palestinians categorized as displaced or refugees had climbed to 70%.
All right, Section 4, the U.S.-Israeli military partnership, the American era.
But here's a fact from the Wikipedia source that might actually surprise you. American military support wasn't immediate at all. There was actually a period of early restraint. Believe it or not, France, yes, France, was actually Israel's main military supplier in those early years. The U.S. didn't approve its first major arms sale, which was for Hawk anti-aircraft missiles, until 1962, and they did it specifically as a Cold War countermeasure, to prevent Soviet influence from spreading into Arab states like Egypt and Iraq. But wow, how things have changed since then, right? Since World War II, Israel has become the single top recipient of U.S. aid. We're talking deeply integrated joint technological development, shared military maneuvers, and that absolutely crucial U.S. diplomatic veto power at the UN. It is a completely comprehensive military and diplomatic alliance.
And that leads us into Section 5, the U.S. Strategy after 2001, Modern Strategic Framing.
There's a really interesting perspective on this from an academic thesis out of Al Nahyan University. This source argues that the September 11 attacks back in 2001 fundamentally shifted American strategy. The thesis argues that 9/11 elevated Israel's status in the eyes of Washington. Basically, in a region that was suddenly viewed entirely through the lens of heightened instability and the war on terror, the U.S. increasingly relied on Israel as a stable, forward-operating base for its Middle East strategy.
Offering a completely different political lens, we have analyst Selçuk Türkyılmaz writing in the Turkish outlet Turk Press. He argues, quote, "The U.S. and UK founded a new colonial state in the Eastern Mediterranean, framing it through the persecution of Jews to build a geopolitical bridge." So this source is presenting the perspective that Western powers have essentially used Israel as a colonial extension of their own strategic and military interests in the region.
Bringing us right up to the present day, these sources note that recent events, especially in Gaza, have sparked unprecedented global polarization. This century-old Western strategy, it's being debated in the public square, and frankly, within the US and UK political establishments themselves, like literally never before.
Which leaves us with a massive question to ponder. As global power dynamics shift and public opinion polarizes, how is this century-old Western strategy in the Middle East going to evolve? The baton passed from Britain to America, but where does it go next? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Catch you next time.